Is Brock Purdy going to hold out? And what are the 49ers willing to pay him to be their franchise quarterback? More on that right after this. Well, it is offseason for the 49ers, and Brock Purdy is the center of the discussion. He is the topic. He is what every news network, what every analyst, what every beat writer, honestly, any content creator is looking at. Every week you have 49ers fans scrolling X to see, are there any updates? Are there any new articles? Are there any leading discussions on where these contract negotiations are going? If history tells us anything, it's that the 49ers are in no hurry to pay anybody. Now, they say one thing in person, but on the backside, they have a certain way that they've negotiated contracts, and players aren't typically thrilled with how they do those things. In fact, it's been a conversation that you hear from veterans that they'll try to coach other ones. It is a messy process. You go back to George Kittle, you go back to Deebo Samuel's contract, he requested a trade. You go back to Brandon Ayuk, requested a trade. Fred Warner, most of these contracts went all the way up to training camp and some beyond that. And it's not a great negotiating tactic. We saw that last year, specifically with Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams, and Christian McCaffrey. Let's talk about Trent Williams. That went up all the way up to week 1. Why did it do that? Because the 49ers just wouldn't budge. And what ended up happening? Trent Williams and company, they weren't in football shape, and ultimately the team suffered for that. You go to Christian McCaffrey, same thing. He held out of OTAs. He ended up getting his contract. Brandon Ayuk, what happened when they held out for that? What happened to the 49ers management? Ayuk's number went up. Why? Because the market changed, because the 49ers held out when they could have ended up paying Brandon Ayuk somewhere in the ballpark of 5 years and $125 million, $25 million a year, 26. And that would have been fine. And he would have accepted that, only there were additional contracts that happened during the 49ers we're not going to budge phase. That can't happen this year. That can't happen this year for multiple reasons. And the question is, Brock Purdy's leadership, is Brock Purdy's representation going to encourage him to hold out? Now, that's the question. Now, when Brock Purdy was asked point blank during exit interviews, when the media had an opportunity to ask questions, are you willing to hold out OTAs? He answered as you would expect, as his representation wanted him to answer. He's not going to address that question. It's, I want to get this thing done quickly so I can go back to playing 49er football, so we can go back and prepare to win championships. That's the right answer. Now, Brock Purdy probably wants no part of holdout. He wants no part of the business side of the things. He wants it to work out. Yes, he wants the best deal he can get. He probably has a number in his mind based on his performance. But you look at this year was the best case scenario for 49ers decision makers. Why is that? Because it tells you, if you don't have a superstar cast around Brock Purdy, how is he going to perform? Can he carry a team? And think point blank, he can't. He can't carry the team on his shoulders. You had Christian McCaffrey, who was out. Brandon Ayuk, who was out. Trent Williams, who was out. On the defense side of the ball, you had Dre Greenlaw, who was out. You had multiple games where Nick Bosa was out. You had Javon Hargrave, who was out. On the back end, you had Talanoa Hufanga was out. Charvarius Ward missed several games as well. And so you start to look, a lot of these players we are paying top dollars. A lot of them are the top paid player at their position. And if you don't have the luxury of paying that and they're out, you get to see firsthand, what can Brock Purdy do if we don't have these other players around? Now, granted, you'll still have some superstars if you pay him top dollar, but you're not going to have this superstar stud cast that you've had in previous years. And the fact that they kind of floundered, Brock Purdy had his worst year to date, shows that he's not worth top 5 quarterback money. Now, there are certain things you can do on the financial side to make it look like you're going to get that type of money. But when you break it down to details and guarantees and ultimately the cap hits each year, that's really where it matters. Because can you afford to continue paying players and keeping that star cast around Brock Purdy? We already know the 49ers have major needs in the trenches on both sides of the ball. If you pay him $60 million a year and his cap hits reflect that, then guess what? You can't build an offensive line around Brock Purdy. He's going to be running for his life. We saw that this year. And so the question is, what is that bottom dollar? I've been on record a couple months ago saying my top dollar for him would be between $38 and $42 million a year. Highest 45. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's a starting point for Brock Purdy's camp. But as a fan, that's what I'd be comfortable with. And then you can finagle the numbers to make it work. But I don't see that happening for multiple reasons. One, Brock Purdy's just going to point to his playoff resume. Now, he didn't make the playoffs this year, and the 49ers management and leadership can point to that. But when you look at those players that are getting paid that much money, you look at a Jordan Love who's making over $50 million a year, Trevor Lawrence making $55 million a year. They're not in the playoffs anymore. Jordan Love made it, had a first-round exit. You look at Jalen Hurts, hasn't been to a Super Bowl. He's making $51 million a year. Now, we're going to talk more on Jalen Hurts in just a bit. But when you talk about some of these players that are making big-time money that are not in the playoffs, Brock Purdy's representation is going to point to that. Brock Purdy's outplayed that. Brock Purdy's been to 2 NFC championships in 3 years. Brock Purdy has been to a Super Bowl within his 3 years. And mind you, it's only been 2.5 years because his rookie year, he came in at the second half of the year while not getting starting reps. So the reality is he's only had 2 full years as a starter and really 1 full offseason, because the first full offseason he was recovering from his UCL injury. That's going to be the side that Brock's representation is going to be coming from. They're going to say he's only going to get better. His body's continuing to fill out. Will be another year removed from his UCL surgery, which means he's going to get even stronger. That's going to be the side that they're going to be coming from. But when you're 49ers representation, you can point to the fact that, look, if we pay him this much, we cannot keep a dominant left tackle around him. If we pay him this much, we cannot keep a dominant running back like Christian McCaffrey. If we pay him this much, we can't keep top wide receiver targets and George Kittle, who's the best tight end in the game, around him. And so the question has to be, there needs to be a center point. Earlier this week, it was projected that his deal projections would be a 4-year, $238 million contract, averaging $59.7 million a year. That would be a huge, huge mistake. That would be Dallas Cowboy level mistake, where you're paying your quarterback so much where you can't fill out the roster and you could say goodbye to making the playoffs or making any real movement in the playoffs for years to come. I think the best case scenario, the absolute best case scenario, would be a Baker Mayfield type contract. 3 years, $100 million. You can guarantee the full thing, and he gets a lot of money up front, gets a chance to continue to prove himself, and then after year 2, you renegotiate based on how he plays. They're not going to accept that, Brock Purdy and his representation, but I believe that's a great starting point. You look at Baker Mayfield's numbers this year, far outplayed Brock Purdy. He had 41 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, where Brock Purdy had, let's see, where were we at? 12 interceptions to only 20 touchdowns. Completely different numbers. Baker Mayfield played out of his mind. Many would say he played out of his contract. He's due for a new one. But this is his first year out of that 3-year, $100 million contract. Now, I want you to look back to Jalen Hurts. We brought him up. Ultimately, I think this is where the team's going to land on, and I'd be okay with this contract. It's a 5-year, $255 million contract, but that's just on the face side of it. When you break down that contract, it looks completely different. Because even though it's 5 years at $255 million, when you look at the cap hits, that's really where it matters, because every team has the same cap unless you roll yours over, of course, and then you have additional cap space. But that's the number that you need to stay under, whatever that league number is. In the past, it's been 255. There's a lot of estimations it's going to go up to potentially 285 this year. But that's the number that you want to keep as low as possible. If you have a player that has a cap hit of 50 or higher, guess what? You don't have enough money around to fill out the roster. But you look at Jalen Hurts' first year of his 5-year, $255 million deal. You know what that cap hit is? $13 million. $13 million. There's a lot that you can do with the rest of the roster with the $13 million cap hit. If the 49ers went that route, right now they are estimated to have $60 million in cap for 2025. And that doesn't include the post June 1st cut designation with Javon Hargrave. So they're going to probably save another $13 million there. So they're probably going to be closer to $70 million. And then there's going to be some extensions. George Kittle probably needs an extension. Fred Warner probably needs an extension. And when those happen, you're going to save some money in the first couple years when it comes to salary cap. And then you have some other contracts that you might end up, restructuring. Deebo Samuel, the question is he going to get cut or extended? In conversations with John Lynch and Kyle, they don't want to get rid of good players and send them off somewhere else. So they essentially said they're going to keep Deebo Samuel. Do you restructure? Do you give them an extension to help alleviate that cap hit? Who knows? But just alone right now, at the $60 million that they're slated to have, in addition to Javon Hargrave being cut as a post June 1st designation, if you went with the same contract that Jalen Hurts has, you would still have about $45 million to sign a lot of good quality players in free agency, build to the draft, even make a couple trades, make a couple splash trades. And that's going all out this year for the Super Bowl. Then look at Jalen Hurts next year, 2025. This next season, his cap hit is $21 million. Very manageable. You go to 2026, $31 million. Very manageable. Because mind you, each year the cap continues to go up. 2027, $41 million. And then it goes to 47 and then 97 and 29. Those are all void years. There are certain things put into the contract where you can do a post June 1st designation. In fact, that deal really breaks down to about a 3-year deal, which is what I would anticipate for Brock Purdy. Because if you can make it to where those cap hits are roughly 13, 21, 31, that's what you want. Because at $13 million, that's only 5% of your salary cap. At $21 million, that's 7% of the salary cap. 31, that becomes 11% of the salary cap in those years. And when you do that, that gives you manageable cap to be able to build the team. And I think that's the sweet spot where Brock Purdy's representation and 49ers management can settle on, because you're not selling your future or mortgaging your future just to say you have one of the highest paid quarterbacks. It gives him upfront money for him and his family, changes their life. It gives you solidarity where you're not having off-season drama and conversations about locking up your quarterback. But it also takes care of you in your future, being able to build a roster that can compete for championships for years to come. I think that's what needs to happen. If that number wiggles about a year or two, if you want to say 5 years, $260 million with these same structures, that'd be fine. But as soon as you go 4 years, $240, averaging 59.7, and it doesn't have a breakdown like this where it's all based off of unreachable designations to get to that, then guess what? 49ers are going to be in salary cap hell, and you don't want that. How many of you remember the Jerry Rice years where he was playing for the Raiders and the 49ers were still paying him for years and years on end because they were in salary cap hell? That is not what you want as a 49ers fan. You want to make sure that the 49ers are on top of the cap, that they are doing what they need to do. Yes, pay your quarterback, but don't pay him top 5 quarterback money. Why? Because he's not a top 5 quarterback. I think he has that potential. Absolutely. I think in a few years, if he continues to develop and grow, he can absolutely be a top 5 quarterback, and then maybe restructure his deal at that time. But right now, the way he's playing right now in his first 3 years, in this past year accounting for no superstars around him, he's absolutely not worth top 5 money. I would give him top 10 money. Again, Jalen Hurts money would be fine with me because of how it is structured. But as soon as you start getting into this 55, 60 plus $60+ million range, that should not happen. And will he hold out? I think ultimately he will hold out of OTAs. I think when it comes to mandatory minicamp, I think his representation will ask him to hold out. I don't think he will. I think OTAs is one thing because those are optional. I think as soon as he starts skipping minicamps, mandatory minicamps and training camp, that's when the 49ers have the leverage. Why? Because they can bring in a Kirk Cousins, who everybody knows Kyle is a fan of and in love with. And if they bring in Kirk Cousins, guess what? Brock Purdy, you've lost your leverage. We just brought over a veteran who can run the same system, who will play on the veteran minimum. Or maybe Sam Darnold's 1 year, $10 million contract. He'll play on that, and we'll just go ride that and draft a replacement. So I think there's definitely leverage on both sides. But if Brock Purdy's representation overplays their hand, you bet bet your top dollar that the 49ers are going to say, you know what, we'll just sign Kirk Cousins. And they might sign Kirk Cousins early just to stick it to Brock Purdy's representation to say, you know what, we're willing to go this route if you're going to play hardball with us. And so I think it's going to make for a very interesting offseason. My prediction is that in May he'll be signed. I think he's going to skip the OTAs in April, and he's going to end up signing before May's mandatory mini camps. That's my prediction. I think it's going to be 5 years, $260 million. Not 5 year, 255, which is Jalen Hurts. I think it's going to adjust about $5 million, but it's going to have the same structure. I could see a $13 million to $20 million cap hit the first year, and then the following 2 years to be in that $20 to $30 million range. That way you essentially have a 3-year window where you can continue to do what you need to do, build the team, and try to get a Super Bowl in the next 3 years. I think that's going to be the 49ers management, their leadership, that Parag, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, that little trio there. I think that's going to be their pitch to Jed York. We'll get you a Super Bowl in 3 years. We need this contract. We'll make it manageable. And in 3 years, you will get at least one Super Bowl, if not two. And then that way, Jed York signs off on it. He's okay saying, yeah, I paid my quarterback 5 year, 260 when it's really not that. But it also gets away of off-season drama, and then you can continue to build the team. You can make legendary trades like for a Myles Garrett or for DeForest Buckner to rebuild that defensive line. You can go get yourself a good center and a good right tackle and build through the draft. I think once the 49ers do that, if they follow this kind of recipe, they're going to have success. But if they go out and they pay Trevor Lawrence money, they go pay Dak Prescott money, they won't do it. There's a reason that Patrick Mahomes signed a 10-year, $450 million deal. It looks great, but guess what? It gives the team cap flexibility to continue to put a good team around him. He's got a good offensive line. The defensive line is scary. The entire defense is the top defense in the league outside the Ravens. And how does that happen? Because Patrick Mahomes said, you know what? I want to win the Super Bowl or Super Bowls. He wants to win multiple of them, and he knows if he's getting paid 65 plus, which he can absolutely ask for, or 70 plus, teams will pay that, then he can't have the team that he needs around him. And so if Brock Purdy gets that, if he wants to go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes in next year's Super Bowl and Super Bowls to come, he needs to be willing to say no to a few $1 million so that way you can continue to build the team around him. You do that, sky's the limit. So Brock Purdy, if you're listening, hold out OTAs, but don't hold out the mandatory mini camps. Settle for the Jalen Hurts contract or a few million more. Keep your team competitive for years to come, and I think things will work out. Well, that's all we have for today. Don't forget to leave comments, thoughts down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.